Oh my goodness. Nice to see you all, although I can't really see you, but it's nice to see you. So I feel very happy and lucky to be here. As was said, I've spent the past 7 years leading both Facebook groups and before that change.org. So basically I've been very lucky to support hundreds of millions and then billions of people as they form communities and then turn those communities into movements. And I've had, during all that time, one massive aha about the whole thing, and that is that anyone can do this. Because I've literally seen everyone who does this, they're so surprising. They're just regular people. I've seen children, teenagers, grandparents, veterans, stay-at-home moms, incarcerated people. Anyone that you can think about is capable of creating a movement and creating a community that sparks that movement. So first I want to talk a little bit about community. Let's see what slide we're on. There we are. So most of you here are experts in community already, so you know what a community looks like. At Facebook, we get to name our conference rooms, and so the groups team conference room is called hosting a party, because communities are, in a way, like hosting a party. First of all, you need a host. They don't run without a leader, and they don't work unless you invite people, introduce them to each other, break up conflicts, etc. But beyond just having a community, we then wanted to look at what does it take to make a really meaningful community, one that actually matters to people. And we did a lot of academic research. We also did on and off platform research all over the world. And we came up with this definition, which now has been shared a few times, that a meaningful community is a two-way relationship where people both give and receive something from that community. And what they get is a sense of belonging, connection, and safety. And what they give is their trust and investment over time. And investment can be anything from just spending their time to spending their money, etc. So one question I think as community leaders or community builders to ask is, how do I know if my community is meaningful or not? One way is to just ask people straight out, is it meaningful? Another way is to look at the behavior in your community. And we found 3 factors that are most likely to predict whether or not your community will be meaningful. One is, do they spend intentional time there? Is it not just accidental time, but do they choose to come, whether you have an online or offline? Are they choosing to spend their time? The second one is, are they engaged? So if it's an offline event, are they talking to other people? Are they engaged in it? If it's online, are they actually commenting? Are they leaving posts? Are they engaged? And the third is what we call connection density. So do people know each other? Do they have friends? Are they finding a home and that sense of real connection in your community? So how do communities and movements relate? Well, the truth is, a movement doesn't really exist without a community, because in its very definition, a movement is the mass mobilization of people around a cause. So you take a movement like this. Can I see a show of hands? How many people have been to any women's march? Woo, yeah, me too. Okay. So sometimes we look at movements like this. We're well aware of them, but we don't necessarily know how they got started. So I want to tell you the story of how the Women's March got started. Some of you may know this story already, but this is a woman. Her name is Teresa Shook. She is a grandmother. She lives in Hawaii. And she was frustrated after the last election. And I'm not making any political commentary here, but just stating facts. She was frustrated. And she went on to Facebook and wrote to her friends. She actually started a little bit of an event page with her friends and said, I think we should march. And she sent it out to her friends, and she got 40 people to sign up. So that was the start of her community. And then Teresa went to bed, and when she woke up, that event had 10,000 people coming. And from there, it grew and grew and got shared in other people's communities and spread more and more, and it became what we know is now a widespread global movement that is the Women's March. So communities and movements both start with individuals. They start with people like you who are brave enough to stand up and do something for the causes you care about. And one thing that I realized is that successful community builders, successful movement builders, and successful entrepreneurs actually all go through the same steps. And they are these steps here, which I call the leadership thread. This is the thread of leadership that goes through all of these things, whether you're building a community, a movement, or a business. First is getting the courage to get started. 2 is creating a clear and compelling vision. 3 is mobilizing people around that vision. Then sometimes you need to persuade decision makers, especially in movements. Often there are people you need to convince to do what you want them to do. Then invariably, the bigger and more successful you get, the more criticism will come your way that you have to navigate. And of course, there will always be obstacles. So when I got to change.org, I saw these skills were so similar to the skills I had seen in my career in tech, and I decided that I would write a book about it. So that's what this book is about. All the proceeds of the book go to charity, which is why I don't feel bad about putting the slide up. But I'm going to talk through a couple of the topics from the book today. So first is about creating a clear and compelling vision. And I think most people think, okay, I know how to make a vision, but my research and talking with all the people who've done this, I really break it down into 3 parts. So a winning vision has 3 parts. 1 is a clearly articulated, desired future. What do you want the world to look like? So this is why vision statements often start with a world where, we envision a world where. The second is a clear purpose, which is why does it matter to you? Or why should it matter to the world? And the third, and this is the part most people forget, but probably not community builders, is you have to have a compelling story, something that goes along with it that's going to get people excited. So this is a story I want to show about someone who has a clear vision and was able to mobilize her community into a movement. This is a woman named Manal Rostam. She's an Egyptian woman. She had a difficult experience when she was in her 20s, where she and her cousin were on a bus ride together, a tourist trip. They were fooling around, playing games. They switched seats, and then a few minutes later, the bus got in a serious accident, rolled over 3 times, and her cousin passed away. And she felt a huge amount of guilt for having lived, given that she was previously sitting in the seat where he was sitting. And so she decided at that point, she was a fairly religious person, but she didn't wear the hijab before this moment, and she decided then, as a sign of gratitude to her faith, to start wearing the hijab. And for years she did, and it was fine, and then all of a sudden she started feeling more discrimination, and so she started a community, a group on Facebook called Surviving Hijab. And she, like Teresa Shook, just invited some of her friends, and now this group is more than 500,000 women all around the world, participating, celebrating, supporting each other through being hijabi women. And Manal also she has a vision, a clear, articulated future where hijabi women are treated equally to all other people in the world. She has a purpose, the why it matters for her, because she personally lives this experience. And she had something that she wanted, a movement she wanted to create. So Manal is also an athlete, and she was really frustrated that there was no gear available for hijabi women. And she would go to events, and it would be very difficult to use and wear. People would be commenting. And so she reached out to Nike directly, and she said, I have this community of 500,000 hijabi women, and we would really like to have athletic gear made for us. This became a movement, and you can see she is wearing it. She is the reason that Nike created Nike Pro Hijab, which launched in January of last year. So communities can really spark movements. Okay, second step is mobilizing people behind that vision. And of course, since there's a whole bunch of community leaders in the room, you all know how to do this, to mobilize people and get them together. But the thing is that it's not enough to get them into a community. You have to actually ask them to help you with something. Just being there isn't enough. And so I sometimes compare this to starting a standing ovation. Can I see a show of hands of anyone here who has been the first person to stand up and clap at anything? Okay, that's pretty good. This room, I expected that because this room is, a lot of very movement-building people. So the truth is, most audiences I talk to, almost no one raises their hand on that question, because it's just kind of scary to get out there and expose yourself and say, here I am, and I want you to join me. But the truth is, once you do it, it almost always works. So let me see, anyone in here ever been at a place where you saw someone stand up and no one else joined them at all? They just stood there. I see maybe one or two hands, yeah. So I have now tried to do this a lot. Like I try and stand up in almost every show I am just to see if I can experiment with that. And I have once, I will be honest, been the only one and no one stood up with me. But I just kept going. I was like, I'm going to clap harder and maybe eventually someone will stand. But the truth is it happens so rarely because once that first person is willing to take a risk, usually other people join them. And you may have seen this. This is you probably have all seen this. Very famous TED Talk about starting movements, where he talks about this man dancing at a concert on a hill. And the key thing here is not just to dance and people will join you, but to embrace your first follower. So when those people come to join you, literally embracing them, taking them into your arms, and then more and more people will join you. And so this is the thing about turning communities, and there everyone goes, yep. Like once Naked Man is, dancing with a few other people, he's impossible to resist. This is what happens with movements and when communities turn into movements. And the one thing that I've seen be really successful about mobilizing people in communities is when you can give people actual roles and responsibilities in your community, then they become part of your movement in a meaningful way. So there's an amazing story about, a community that was started in the wake of Hurricane Harvey. And this happens in every natural disaster. It just happened this week around Dorian. We see these communities build up, and people are helping and supporting each other. So there was a community started around Hurricane Harvey by a woman named Jennifer Cardenas in Houston. And she, was the founder, got it started, 150,000 people joined her, and then she lost internet access because she was in the zone of the hurricane. And so you have a movement when it can continue without you there. That's one of the key ways to tell. And Jennifer had assigned roles to all the people, not all the people, but a select number of people in her group, and they kept it going even when she wasn't there, and they ended up rescuing 8,000 people from Hurricane Harvey. Okay, so the next step is about persuading decision makers. So one difference between a pure community and a movement is that movements have a cause in mind. They often require persuading members of government, company CEOs, et cetera, to take an action that you want them to take in order to change something that matters to you. So there's traditionally been, in social organizing, a model that's kind of about David and Goliath. This is people with little power speaking truth to big power, and David fighting Goliath. And social organizers often use this image to describe that. If a big fish is coming after you as little fish can get together and they can organize, and together they can go after the bigger fish. I am proposing a slightly different model here because I think that over time, the best way to work with decision makers is to leverage our power in a way where we all win. So my proposed model looks like this. You have the power. You're just as big as the decision maker you want to persuade, and they know that at any moment you could reorganize into a big fish that chases them. But we start by just coming together face to face, trying to understand what each side needs and wants, and see if we can get the change to happen by working together. So I have an example here I want to share. There's a trigger warning on this example, so if anyone wants to step out or put some headphones on or something, that's okay. This is Amanda Wynn. She was a college student at Harvard, and in her senior year, she was raped. And Amanda did what you're supposed to do, which is she went to the hospital, she had a rape kit done, and then she went to the police, and she found out that in the state of Massachusetts where she lived, that rape kits were only kept in evidence for 6 months at a time. And if the person who was the survivor of that crime didn't go and petition with complicated paperwork, the police, every 6 months, they would throw away the rape kit, which is the evidence for that crime. No other crime do we have where evidence gets thrown away. So this is a sign of how sexual assault survivors are treated in this country. So Amanda went to her community. She did something extremely brave, which is that she emailed everyone she knew. And she said, "This is what happened to me, and I want to fix it. Will you join me?" And of course, almost all of them said yes, because she stood for the standing ovation and they joined her. And so all of a sudden, she had accountants and lawyers and engineers and comedians and all the people who were her friends in her network ready to volunteer and help her. She also went to change.org, and she got hundreds of thousands of people to sign a petition that she didn't know, and in that group, she found a new community of other survivors. And she brought those survivors with her to Washington, D.C., and together they went into Congress. And understanding the decision makers that they were trying to persuade, which were members of Congress, she used that network, and she said, okay, what are the economic aspects of this law? They drafted the actual text of the law using legal precedent so that they wouldn't have to do any work. She understood the financials of each district. She brought all of these survivors in to tell their own personal stories with the vision. And Amanda was able to pass unanimously in the United States Congress what's called the Sexual Assault Survivors Bill of Rights. It is one of only 21 bills since 1989 to pass unanimously in the Congress. And Amanda was a young woman in her early 20s. I have a video here. I will play it. I think I have time. One of the things she did was to leverage her network to tell the story in a way that would disarm people around this issue and would show the absurdity of it. And I'll show you a little clip from that. We need the sound on this one.
You're gonna bail on me again, Monica. We had tickets to the hottest concert in town tonight. I'm sorry. I'm just really tied down. Work? Nope. I have to go down to the police station to repetition them not to destroy my rape kit. Rape kit? You mean all the evidence they spent hours collecting from every part of your body in the hospital on the night you were raped? Yep. They want to throw it out without even testing to see if there's a DNA match. It's such a drag. Rats. God, that must have been really emotionally scarring for you. I know. I'm such a spaz, I completely spaced out about it. That happens to me all the time. Really? Totally. That's why I finally caved and bought myself a sexual assault survivor's utility belt. Wow. Here, you can borrow mine. Really? Of course. I've got an extra. You know, there are 25 million sexual assault survivors in the U.S. and counting. So these babies are being mass-produced. Oh, chic and helpful. A 6-month timer to remind me when to go down to the police station and convince the...
Okay, you get the idea. But really what Amanda did is massively leverage her community and then do it in a way where the decision makers understood what she was trying to do and she understood them. And so once she passed this law nationally, of course these laws are done state by state, so they have to also go and pass it in every state. And now they started at the beginning of 2017, and they've passed it in 27 of 50 states already. And she did it, yeah, it's pretty amazing, by training her community to each be their own movement starter. So each of the survivors in each state went and became essentially their own Amanda, running their own movement. And now she's started what's called Rise Justice Labs to help train all sorts of people to make their own laws, essentially, fighting for what they care about. Okay, so the next step is once you're successful, you will have to navigate a lot of criticism that comes your way. My favorite quote on this is from Jeff Bezos: "If you can't tolerate critics, then don't do anything new or interesting." So what I wanted to share here are a number of techniques that I've learned from people who do this about how they navigate criticism. The first example comes from a woman named Myrna Forster. She is a woman in Canada who fought for women to be on Canadian currency. And she won that campaign. The woman here in the picture is Viola Desmond, who is now the woman on Canadian currency. She is like the Rosa Parks of Canada. She would refuse to give up her seat in a movie theater. But Myrna, who started this campaign, faced a lot of criticism. People would say things online and to her on the radio and so forth, like, "Why are you doing this? You know, women should only be on currency if they're topless," and like just ridiculous things. And so what Myrna would do is remember her allies. On her change.org petition, when people signed it, they had what are called reasons for signing. And she just printed them out. And she carried them around with her in her bag. And whenever anyone, criticized her, she just pulled out those comments and she just read them over and over again, reminding her that there were way more people who believed in her that didn't. The second tool here is what I call leveraging the naysayers. This is Mary Lou Jepsen. She is one of the co-founders and inventors of the what's called One Laptop Per Child, this light, readable, solar, very inexpensive laptop. Nobody thought she could do it. And she went to her biggest critics and actually used them to help her. So she went to one of the biggest Asian tech companies, met with all their executives. They told her, "There are 23 reasons why this won't work." And she said, "Tell me what they are." And she wrote them all down, and she said, "Well, I've got 17 of those figured out. Let me go back and try and fix the rest." Hi there. and that's what she did. And so she basically used the most expensive labor around as her bug testers for her product, which was helpful. She leveraged the naysayers. The third example is what's called the bear hug. I learned this from the person who's now the COO at change.org. It is the idea of treating people who criticize you with an outsized dose of love and understanding, which seems sometimes counterintuitive, but people do not come out of the womb as haters and trolls. Like, something has happened to them to cause this. And this example, when I first started at Change, we were being really spammed by this person in Spain, and what he was doing was putting fake signatures on petitions and then screenshotting them and then sending them to the press, which was really no fun. We had a system that would take down bulk fake signatures, but individual fake signatures like that would sometimes take up to 24 hours to remove. So he was catching us in this zone right before we would remove them. And the first instinct is to use technology. So all the engineers in the room were saying, we can block his IP, we can do this. And this person said, "Why don't we try the bear hug," which is, let me go talk to him in person and see what's happening, which does seem like a bit of a boondoggle because this person lived on an island off the coast of Spain. But I realized it was less expensive to send one person to Spain than to put an entire team of engineers on fighting him. So we did that. We sent him to Spain. And he talked to him, and as it turns out, the person really cared about this one particular issue, and he thought that it might not be real, the signatures. And so he was trying to prove whether it was or wasn't. And when Benjamin explained how the system worked, not at super detail, but at high level, he then understood, and all of a sudden I got pictures of them in a bar together, drinking beers, arms around each other, and he said, "Now I feel heard and listened to, and I understand the system," and he stopped spamming us. So sometimes the bear hug works. This one I don't need to tell this group, but sometimes the people really are doing inappropriate things and you should report them. And the last thing about navigating criticism I will share is what I call maintain perspective. This is my family. And one of the things that happened in my life that gives me perspective is that my older daughter when she was 7, got in a very, very serious accident and ended up in a coma in the ICU for a week. And I thought we just were not sure that she was going to make it. And in those moments, you know for sure that nothing else is more important. That it doesn't matter what someone said to you in a tweet or a comment or anywhere else, that these are the things in life that really matter. And so I draw back my memory of moments like that to remind me how to get through the criticism when it happens. Okay, and lastly, I want to talk a little bit about overcoming obstacles, because on the way to starting movements, there is no single movement ever that has just been up and to the right. Like they all have ups and downs and all have obstacles. This is the way I describe it. It's kind of like climbing a mountain. Some days are sunny and you're at the top and you brought a picnic lunch, and some days are really cloudy and stormy and you're at the bottom. And they go back and forth and back and forth. And so the key is to remind yourself that both days will come. So to enjoy the sunny days, but still keep climbing, and remember when it gets cloudy that it will be sunny again. And what I found about obstacles is that there are 4 different types of crisis responders. So when you hit a crisis in your community or in your movement, look for these 4 types of people. There are 3 that you want and 1 that you don't want. So I'm going to go through all 4, and also you might spot yourself in some of these. The 4 types of crisis responders inside organizations and communities are also just like those that respond to natural disasters and so forth. So before I jump into this, I want to acknowledge that anyone who is an actual, real crisis responder, those people are real heroes and risk their lives for things. This is a metaphor to make the same point. So, 4 types of crisis responders. The first are firefighters. These are people who love a crisis. They want to take action as soon as something goes wrong. They are the people who sleep with the phone by the bed. They like crisis comms. They like fixing bugs that urgently need to be fixed. These are your firefighters. The second type are fire inspectors, also police detectives, forensic scientists. These are the people who want to understand why something caught on fire in the first place. They want to diagnose how decisions were made, what processes happened, and make sure that they don't happen again. So they are preventing your future fires. The third type are EMTs, or paramedics. These are also aid workers. These are the people in your community that think first about other people. They're the ones who bring in snacks, the ones who work on FAQs, the one who makes sure that everybody is hearing what's important and has the resources to get through the crisis. And this is what you don't want. The 4th type of crisis responder is what I call the doomsayer. These are people who get paralyzed in a crisis. They see dead ends in every direction. They see no solutions. They think because your house caught on fire, the whole neighborhood will catch on fire. And I think it's important, if you can, to name these things, because if people realize they're being a doomsayer, sometimes they can be shaken out of it. Or they can, you don't always have to be the one responding to the crisis. Sometimes you can just stick by your regular job, role, etc. But the key is not to bring other people down by being a doomsayer. So if you have doomsayers around you, then my suggestion is help them understand, see if you can shift their skill set, or maybe you don't want them in your community. So those are the steps, and I want to end with one thought, which is we are all movement starters. Already, by being a community builder, you have done more than half the battle of starting a movement, because mobilizing people is the bulk of what starting movements is. So I hope that you all go out there and pick something that you want to change and start your own movement, and thank you very much.